Now that said, I do think that the country is heading down a very bad direction right now in terms of the economy. And in fact, I'm noticing more often that the skilled occupations, professional occupations, are being filled by immigrants, foreigners. And I have nothing against foreigners. I have nothing against immigrants. I have nothing against immigration. In fact, what I see this whole immigration control movement doing is scapegoating immigrants. And of course, the government is going to want us to look at everything other than itself to blame. So I see this effort to scapegoat immigrants. People have this idea that immigration is injurious to the economy, that population is somehow inherently injurious to the economy. I mean, these are really Malthusian arguments. And pursuant to some of these arguments, I mean, you could almost come up with a government program to cull the population. You know, let's kill some people off. You know, that'd be good for the economy. Well, no, it won't. There's nothing intrinsically injurious about having more people. In fact, if we didn't have so many government controls and regulations on our activities, more people could mean more productivity. And so we end up missing the fact that the real injurious activity, what's really hurting the economy, is the government itself. It's government regulations, government control of our activities, taxation, the way it spends money, and of course in order to finance this spending orgy going on, it just prints more money. These things are not good. And as I was mentioning earlier, I'm noticing more and more that a lot of the professional occupations are being filled by foreigners. Now, if Congressman Hunter needs some real issues, why doesn't he talk about something like this? In fact, I'm a disabled veteran. You know, this is where I had injured my shoulder when I was in the Marine Corps. And I'm noticing more often when I go to the VA that the nurses are from other countries, the Philippines, the doctors are from countries all over Asia. I'd say a huge percentage of some of the professional occupations, and we're talking about government jobs here, are being filled by foreigners. Well, why is this? Why is this happening? Now, I have nothing against foreigners and immigrants whatsoever, but when something like this is happening, I think we need to ask ourselves why. Is this because Americans would not be willing to take jobs like this? You know, it's kind of funny, you go back several years ago, and the argument for open borders and uncurtailed immigration was that, well, we need all these people to come in to take the jobs we don't want. Well, now we're seeing foreigners coming in, immigrants coming in, taking the professional occupations. Why are Americans being displaced? Again, is it because we don't want to take these jobs? Hardly. I'll tell you what the problem is here. The government, as it metastasizes, grows, expands, it creates barriers to becoming an economic participant, whether it's through occupational licensing laws, controlling and accrediting education, thereby making it artificially much more scarce. And in the process of spending all the money that it spends on all the various programs, it prints more money, which devalues the dollar. And all these regulations, these controls, drive up the cost of living. The government devalues our currency in order to finance its spending. In fact, this is really no different than a tax. There's no objective difference between the government taking the money that you have in your pocket and the government duplicating the money that you have in your pocket, consequently devaluing what you have. Of course, we feel this when we have to pay higher prices for goods and services, including things like education. And so we end up in a situation where the cost of living soars. And we've seen just over the last few years, the cost of living has gone up enormously. Gold in the year 2001 was about $275 an ounce. It had been stagnating at that for quite some time. Now it's almost $700 an ounce. This is because the government is spending, and we're just talking on budget items, the federal government alone, not even counting state, local government, the federal government alone on budget spending, not even counting off budget spending, approaching $3 trillion per year. to finance this, it just prints more money. What happens then is the cost of living goes up. And so they're actually driving up the cost for us to purchase the credentials necessary to satisfy the requirements of the government to work in these so-called professional occupations. And of course, some people say, well, we need the government to regulate everything. No, we don't. The government does not sustain itself by satisfying consumer demands. This is why problems inhere with everything it does. When you have occupational licensing laws, this creates a situation in which everything being done is absolutely not in the interest of the consumer. No longer do doctors have to respond to the wants and needs of their consumers, i.e. their patients. Instead, they have to respond to the demands, the dictates, the mandates of the state, the government, in order to keep their license. And it should be no surprise that orthodox medicine is one of the biggest killers today. I joke around with people. I say, hey, it took doctors 8-10 years worth of schooling to learn how to kill people. I was in the Marine Corps. It took me 3 months to learn how to kill somebody, and a lot quicker than they do it. Just joking around here. I wouldn't kill anybody or anything like that, but just a little joke. It's like, yeah, it took them 10 years of schooling to figure out how to kill somebody. This is what happens when the state starts getting involved in things that we do. They become worse. They become more inefficient. And so as the government controls the economy in this plurality of different ways, it drives up the cost of living. And what we're seeing now is that it's becoming unaffordable for the average American to live in our own country. The cost to purchase these credentials is becoming exorbitantly high right now. And so the government has created a situation in which we Americans can no longer afford to purchase the credentials required to work in these professional occupations. In fact, there's a quote that has oftentimes been attributed to Thomas Jefferson, in which, although it wasn't really by him, in which it was something to the effect like, first by inflation, the government will deprive us of all of our property, causing us to become homeless and living on the continent that our forefathers conquered. Something to that effect. I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't really Thomas Jefferson that said it. In fact, there are parts of it that I don't totally agree with. But nonetheless, this is so true. We're finding that we can no longer afford to live in our own country. Whereas some of these other countries that don't have these these omnipresent governments, these gigantic governments on steroids, they can actually afford to purchase the credentials. They can go through the schooling in their country for relatively cheap compared to us, and then they come over here and fill these professional occupation jobs because we cannot afford to purchase the credentials necessary because the cost of living here is so out of control. And so we're being displaced by immigrants, by foreigners. And maybe this is an issue that Congressman Hunter could look into. I think maybe Congressman Hunter should spend more time listening and watching Congressman Ron Paul. Ron Paul understands this. Duncan Hunter does not. And until we get a handle on this issue, I don't think we're going to be able to bring our country back to what it once was. I don't think we will be able to restore the American dream. And I think we're going to see this trend of immigrants and foreigners coming in to take these professional jobs increase until we get a handle on this out-of-control metastasizing government. So Congressman Hunter, if you need a real issue, how about talking about that? Rather than telling us how you want to put a Berlin Wall of North America along the border. Please, no Berlin Walls of North America, Congressman.